Hello YouTube, today I'll be showing you a Barbarian Assault hard mode guide for the attacker role for waves 1 to 9 hard mode. Now I have a full run in the description for me playing 1 to 9 attacker, so I have a quick disclaimer. This guide is dedicated for Revolution users or average players. It's also not dedicated for solo attackers. So I'll get into the difficulty. I would rate this easy to medium as difficulty to learn, but to master, it's extremely hard. Killing monsters very fast requires perfect ability rotation, and that's why record-setting teams have really fast attackers. Now for the combat intensiveness, you'll be taking a lot of damage. So most teams do occupy 2 attackers, so it's a pretty common role to have. This role is suited for people with high combat stats, but very little knowledge on Barbarian Assault. This role is suited for people who are going for bonus XP and who refuse to level up their role. Because a level 5 attacker, there's not much difference compared to a level 1. So for the suggested levels, I highly suggest you have a high range and defense level. Alright, so let's get into my gear setup. The most important thing you want to have is red or mechanized Chinchompas. This is because they attack in a really close radius, and the monsters are often clustered together. You don't really need mechanized Chinchompas unless you're going for like record teams or something. I would get a ranged weapon that's at least tier 80 or higher. You can get Shadow Glaives if you can't afford any ranged weapon. The perk I would put is Aftershock, but that's pretty optional anyways. You also want the best armor possible for range. At the very least, you want Death Lotus or Pernix or better than that. I know Void does extra damage, but I don't suggest using it here because you're going to take a lot of damage. You also don't want to use Armadillo armor either. Then I have a Blood Amulet, and preferably I would suggest you get Blood Ranging Amulet. Now this basically heals back damage while you're attacking over time. Now because prayers do not work here, you cannot use Amulet of Zealots. The aura I have is Vampirism or Inspiration, as is really helpful here. Silverhawk Boots is optional, but you can get Agility XP while you're playing. So for my inventory setup, I would bring a tier 80 or higher range weapon on your main hand. This is basically a weapon switch, and it will save Chinchompas, and also does a higher 1 vs 1 damage in case all of them are dead except one monster. Then I have Enhanced Excalibur for extra healing. There are a couple of optional things you can bring, and that is a Ring of Vigor swap, a couple of Jug of Wines, as they're actually allowed in Barbarian Assault for extra healing. You also want to bring a strong halberd such as Noxious Scythe, because this will help you provide a really strong AoE damage with the abilities of Hurricane and Quake. So for my action bar, this is pretty much dedicated for Revolution. I don't use full manual, so I can't really help you out on this. So the first basic ability you want to have is Corruption Shot. This is basically unlocked from the Codex, or you can just simply buy it from the GE. Trust me, it's really helpful for Barbarian Assault. You then want Ricochet, and that is to tag enemies outside of your Chinchompa reach. Then you want to follow it with Needle Strike, then Fragmentation Shot, then Sacrifice, then Binding Shot, and finally Piercing Shot. The Tuska's Wrath does not AoE with Chinchompas however, so don't put it there. For thresholds, you want Bombardment for optimal AoE damage. The other thresholds I would put here are Shadow Tendrils, Snapshot, or Rapid Fire. The ultimate ability I would suggest is actually Dead Shot. This can kill a lot of enemies instantly at once with Chinchompas. Otherwise, if you have lots of spare adrenaline, you can use Death's Witness for extra damage. You may also want to put all 3 stances on your action bar, because that way it's a lot easier to switch. On your second action bar, you also want to turn on Insight. This basically helps keep monsters closer to you. Then another ability you want to put there is Surge and Freedom. Freedom basically clears bleeds from fighters and rangers, because they have a really strong ultimate attack. And then finally, you want to keep Auto Retaliate off at all times. So the basic part of an attacker is you want to kill penance fighters and rangers. The higher level you have an attacker, the more damage you can do. It's not really needed to invest points in it, but extra damage really is nice anyways. So make sure you are in the right combat stance. It's either aggressive, defensive, or balance. If you're on the wrong stance, it won't deal damage to the penance creatures. And not only that, but you'll also be reflected 100 damage for each hit you attempt to do. Now it's extremely dangerous if you're using bleed abilities on a full stack of penance. So in case you don't know, the stances are located in your HP abilities book. For calling, the attackers will call the correct egg color for the collector. Now you can use your Horn or Glory or from your HP abilities. There are 3 colors, either red, green, or blue. So on top of the screen you'll see the attacker stance changes, and the egg color changes. It'll flash as soon as a change occurs, and that happens every 30 seconds or so. Now don't worry about the attacker machine that's on your south, because it doesn't really give anything helpful. And last but not least, for the most part, you're responsible for keeping yourself alive. I know there's a healer that can heal you, but you don't need much healing if you're a decent attacker. Alright, so I'm just gonna get into the map. And the common mistake I see people doing is running into the wrong places. So the green zone is where you'll mostly be standing, somewhere on the northwest corner of the map. There are 2 types of attackers, depending on whether you tag fighters or rangers, and I'll explain that in more detail later on. The yellow zone is your vicinity zone, and this is where you'll mostly stand if you have to move. Now if for some reason the Penance fighters and rangers somehow sneak to the east side, then you just want to stand near the cannon and then range them. And finally the red zone. Never run into that zone as long as there's Penance healers and Penance runners alive. Now near the east trap, it can really kill you if several runners get near the defender. Now between the cannons and the middle east section of the map, you never want to run across this zone, because then if the healers are alive, then it can mess up the defender lure. Alright, so I'm just going to get into the strategy. Routinely, before you start every wave, you want to start with aggressive stance, just in case you forgot to change a stance. You want to make sure your character is facing northwest diagonally. So once the wave has spawned, you want to immediately surge in a diagonal direction. Then you want to run north and go to your position, depending on whether you're tagging rangers or fighters. So again, like I said before, there are two types of attackers. The one who's tagging the ranger, you should stand 1 square south and 1 square west of the green portal. Then you want to attack the rangers beside you, and this is where you optimize your AoE abilities. Now if you're tagging the fighters, you want to stand 2 squares south of the green portal. Then you want to tag the fighters one by one on your right side. Now this time your job is a little harder, and you want to lure the fighters within the ranger's AoE radius. This will keep the fighters within the AoE radius of the other attacker. So basically just tag any new Penance fighter that spawns. And you can also help the other attacker AoE the Penance between every fighter spawn. So yeah, the next strategy for both attackers is always check your stance changes. If the collector does not call the stance in time, then you can actually guess the stance. Stances will never repeat itself consecutively. So for example, if the previous stance was aggressive, there's a 50-50 chance that it will be either balanced or defensive. So at one point, you'll be fired a green egg from either the collector or the healer. It's usually the healer though. It'll basically give you the overload stats. So as for calling, only one of you need to call the collector eggs. Preferably the one who's tagging the fighter should call, because they don't require a specific ability rotation. Now another thing is, if you know a stance change is coming anytime soon, then you want to avoid using bleed abilities. This is because you'll take a lot of damage in a short period of time. Now when there are a few enemies left, you can switch to your main hand range weapon. This basically saves Chinchampas, and also does a higher 1 vs 1 damage. So once all the fighters and rangers are dead, there's nothing else to do, except call egg colors. So pretty much with a decent ability bar, you should kill them pretty fast. If you're losing HP pretty fast, then either you're changing your stances too slow, or your armor's too weak. Like I said before, you generally should not require too much healing from the healer. Now I've seen a really good attacker require no heals, even on wave 9. Now if there are any fighters or rangers loose on the east side, then you want to finish off the west side fighters first before you kill them. So in summary, attacker is fairly easy if you're good at combat. It doesn't require too much knowledge on Barbarian Assault itself, and there's nothing really specific after you get your positions right. Although it does cost money, but you only consume like 20 to 40 chins per round. I tried my best to save Chinchampas here. If you're not at all trying to save Chinchampas, then you'll probably consume 50 to 80. So in case you haven't heard, I'll leave a link in the description of me playing both attacker roles. So yeah, thanks for watching and I hope it helps. If I missed anything, feel free to ask.